If you approached me on a random day of the week and said, Brian, what's your favorite movie? There are a handful of different answers I would give you. There's approximately a 50% chance that I would say it's Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Probably because I believe that it's not just the greatest action movie of all time, but it's also one of the very best movies ever made. It nails absolutely everything. The story is amazing, the performances are outstanding, the music is perfect, the special effects are world class, and the T-1000 is one of the most terrifying villains ever put up on the screen. If there's a problem with Terminator 2 and really the first two films, it's that they are so damn fantastic that the very idea of a worthy sequel is absurd. This notion has been put to the test a number of times. In the early 2000s, we got Terminator 3, a movie with a female bad girl just for the sake of it, and a depressingly dark ending that rendered the previous films obsolete. A few years later, there was Terminator Salvation, a movie that shows us the future war against the machines, but is most well known for Christian Bale going Harry Carey on a crew member for committing the heinous crime of doing his job. Nearly a decade after that, the powers that be cursed us with the traffic accident called Terminator Genesis. The problems with that movie are numerous, but I'll just hit you with three of them. First of all, I'm in love with Emilia Clarke, but she was an awful Sarah Connor. Second, they spelled Genesis wrong for some dumb reason. Maybe they should have had the foresight to spell it G-N-S-Y-S or something, because leaving out vowels is very early 2020s. Third, Genesis had some of the worst marketing of any movie I had ever seen, and that's not an exaggeration. They ruined the amazing surprise that John Connor is the bad guy in the trailer for the movie against the objections of director Alan Taylor. It's no wonder that it lost a ton of money. Now we get Terminator Dark Fate. So does it suck as bad as the last three films? Actually, no, it really doesn't, but that doesn't mean it's great. Thank you so much for checking out the review. Before we get started, click on that red subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you know whenever I post a new piece of content. I'm telling you this right now. If you don't want this movie spoiled, avert your eyes, because this sequel messes with the history of the series in the first 5 minutes, and it's a huge spoiler, and I will talk about all of it. Terminator Dark Fate seemed doomed for failure from the very beginning. Combine the historical decline of the franchise with a cringeworthy first trailer, and I was primed for disappointment. Fortunately, the film isn't nearly the catastrophe I was expecting. Starting off on a Guatemalan beach after the events of Terminator 2, a mysterious T-800 shows up and murders the teenage John Connor in front of his mother. Choosing to immediately undermine the conclusion of a beloved film like T2 is a brave choice, and one that you gotta give the filmmakers credit for sticking with. While it was ultimately James Cameron's decision to make, director Tim Miller went along with the choice for better and for worse. If they had killed off the Nick Stahl, Christian Bale, or Jason Clarke versions of the characters, I wouldn't care. But this is the John Connor, so it carries more emotional weight. It's a great testament to the visual effects team because John Connor and the younger Sarah look exactly like their 90s counterparts. This is the single best instance of de-aging you'll see in a film so far, even besting the younger Rachel from Blade Runner 2049. I also have to give Paramount a little bit of credit for not spoiling this in the marketing. That honestly seems like something they would have done. Speaking of visual effects, this is the area where Dark Fate excels the most. The vast majority of the effects look fantastic, and while there's certainly not the monumental leap forward we experienced with T2, they get the job done. When watching Dark Fate, you have to set aside your knowledge of the previous sequels. As a direct follow-up to the second film, it tries its damnedest to continue the story decades in the future. Mexican girl Dani Ramos essentially plays the younger Sarah Connor role from the first film, but instead of giving birth to the future leader of mankind, she is the future leader of mankind. And this is where the story starts to spiral into lazy territory. By combining the best parts of the first two films, it sadly doesn't create a positive outcome. This is rampant everywhere, and I brought receipts. This is also an issue with Terminator 2, but it's taken to an absurd level here. In The Terminator, a bad future robot comes back in time to kill Sarah Connor and is defended by a human protector. In Dark Fate, a future robot comes back to kill Dani Ramos and is protected by a human protector named Grace, but she's robotically enhanced. In The Terminator, the heroes end up stuck in a police station where the villain finds them and kills all the cops. In Dark Fate, the heroes end up stuck in a border patrol detention facility where the villain finds them and kills all the border patrol agents. As you can see, there's like a lot of repetition from the previous movies. It also commits the grave sin of copying and stealing some of the dumbest parts of the sequels. In Terminator 3, they have a conversation about the T-800's power source, and then later it's used to kill the TX. In Dark Fate, they have a conversation about Grace's power supply, and that's later used to kill the Rev 9. Perhaps the most notable example of stealing from the other films is with the villain villain himself. It's essentially a carbon copy of the TX from Terminator 3, which is already a combination of the bad guy from Terminator and the bad guy from Terminator 2. A hardened endoskeleton covered in liquid metal, but instead of having built-in weapons, the Rev 9 is able to separate the liquid metal and become two Terminators at once. It's a cool feature that the movie actually does use pretty well, but while the T-1000 had one clear singular goal, which was to kill John Connor, the Rev 9 feels like he's got two goals: kill Danny Ramos and look especially cool while doing it. The T-1000 was also a cool looking villain, but it's something we hadn't seen before. I enjoyed Gabriel Luna's performance in the part, but the T-1000 was first in and best dressed. He was showing us something new and exciting that we hadn't seen before. We've seen the liquid metal and the shape-shifting, and the Rev 9 is just a modern rehashing of that with a black Terminator endoskeleton instead of a silver one. Speaking of that black endoskeleton, the reason it's black is due to a significant piece of storytelling. While Sarah, John, and the T-800 clearly saved the world at the end of Terminator 2, humanity just decided to make a different AI defense supercomputer, but instead of Skynet, this one is called Legion. The storytelling here has just become lazy beyond the point of absurdity. It even shows a couple of future war scenes, and this is all boring and dumb. Natalie Reyes does a fine job as Danny, but she looks like 16 years old. And in the future scenes, she also looks like she's 16 years old. Mackenzie Davis's portrayal of Grace is exactly what you would expect. Strong female character that wants to kick ass, and she does, and it's fine. The two best characters here are easily the T-800, once again played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor. If at any point you've become confused about the timeline of all of these movies, don't worry. I'm here to sort it out for you. In the Terminator and Terminator 2, Linda Hamilton was Sarah Connor, a fact that Dark Fate reminds you of during the opening credits, in which might actually be the best part of the whole movie. In Terminator 3, Sarah is dead. She's killed by cancer. This is referenced to by John. In Terminator Salvation, Sarah is also dead, but we at least get to hear some voiceover work from Hamilton. In Terminator Genesis, Sarah Connor does some time travel stuff, and as I mentioned, is played by Emilia Clarke. As I'm thinking about all this, I'm actually starting to wonder if Terminator Salvation was a direct sequel to Terminator 3, because honestly, I'm not even sure at this point. I just checked, and it is. But it doesn't matter. Hamilton is back for the long-awaited T2 sequel, which also feels like a reboot. And she's good. I mean, she's decades older, and the movie around her kind of sucks, but she's good. Of course, it's not a Terminator movie without some form of Arnold, and this is probably the best he's been since T2. The movie makes the interesting decision to have a robot with a conscience, and he plays the role completely straight. While the character is written to spout the occasional boomer joke, it never even comes close to approaching the nightmare cringe of Terminator 3.
Hey, are you gonna pay for that?
Talk to the hand.
I love the first two Terminators so much and have always been open to the idea of a fantastic sequel. While Dark Fate has some awesome action and makes no apologies for its dreary storyline, it simply doesn't have the emotional punch of its predecessors and is hampered by a pretty bad script. I enjoyed this one way more than I should have, despite its myriad of shortcomings, but even I have to acknowledge the sad truth. We should never, ever, ever get another Terminator film. Unless James Cameron decides to write, produce, and direct another one, there's simply no point in going back to the well. The Terminator is fantastic, and Terminator 2 is the perfect action movie and one of the best sequels. So maybe it's time we just leave well enough alone. At the very least, Tim Miller deserves credit for doing his best to salvage an impossible situation and making a watchable Terminator movie. Thank you so much for checking out the review. If you found it helpful, please consider subscribing. You can also like and share the video since that tells YouTube it's worth promoting. Let me know down in the comments what you think of Terminator Dark Fate, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 9 a.m.